It's 5 a.m. in Mississippi, 1948. The kitchen smells like cornbread and chicory. A cast iron skillet hisses with butter. Grandma Pearl moves slow but steady, stirring, flipping, humming. No store-bought cereal here, just hoe cakes made from leftover cornmeal and love. She doesn't know it yet, but this breakfast, this little moment, is part of a history that's disappearing faster than the smell of bacon on Sunday morning. If you ever woke up to the smell of fatback sizzling, biscuits rising, or sweet molasses coffee bubbling on the stove, you were raised right. But have you ever wondered where those breakfasts went? Why no one talks about them anymore? Some of these breakfasts disappeared, and not by accident. These weren't just breakfasts. They were family history, survival strategies, soul food before that term even existed. But over time, these dishes disappeared, replaced by boxed cereal and convenience. Today, we're digging them back up because every plate tells a story, and these stories deserve to be remembered. Stick with me, because we're about to recover something they tried to erase, and it tastes like freedom. See, breakfast wasn't just the first meal of the day. It was how you started your hustle. Whether you were working the fields, heading to church, or walking miles to school, breakfast fueled the story of survival. Before there were pancakes and Pop-Tarts, there was cornmeal mush. Hot, thick, sweetened with molasses. Enslaved cooks transformed field rations into comfort food. Let me paint you a picture. You're given cornmeal. Cheap, filling, basic. That's it. That's what you get to feed your family. Most people, they'd make one bland dish and call it done. But black cooks, they turned that single ingredient into an entire cuisine. Cornmeal mush for dinner, fried mush for breakfast, hoe cakes, Johnny cakes, cornbread, corn coffee, one ingredient, infinite possibilities. That's not poverty cooking, that's genius. Fried apples were dessert and breakfast rolled into one. And rice with syrup? That was the original breakfast bowl long before Instagram made it pretty. You want to know where these recipes came from? Look to Africa, the slow cooking, the grain-based dishes, the way they stretched ingredients across multiple meals. That's West African technique applied to American ingredients. That's cultural memory surviving through flavor. And here's what they don't tell you in culinary schools. The innovation wasn't just about taste, it was about survival. When you're given scraps and told to feed a family, when you're denied access to ingredients and told to make it work anyway, you either innovate or you starve. Black cooks chose innovation every single time. They made breakfasts that not only filled bellies but carried culture forward. Breakfasts that said, you can enslave our bodies but you can't erase our heritage. Every bite was resistance. Every recipe was rebellion. But these breakfasts were more than food. They were sacred. In most homes, breakfast wasn't fancy, but it was everything. Sunday morning meant biscuits from scratch, fried sausage, maybe sweet rice if you were lucky. Before the day's struggle, families gathered at the table, prayed, laughed. That meal carried them through the week. You ever notice how your grandmother never used recipes? Never wrote anything down? That wasn't forgetfulness. That was tradition. Cooking was passed down by watching, by standing next to the stove at 5 years old, absorbing the way dough should feel, the way grease should sound, the exact moment to flip a hoe cake. This was oral history. Living history. The kind that doesn't survive in books. It survives in kitchens. And when breakfast was done right, it was an act of love. Those biscuits weren't store-bought. They were hand-patted masterpieces, baked in cast iron that had stories of its own. That gravy came from bacon drippings saved in a jar by the stove. Nothing wasted, everything honored. Your grandmother could make a feast from almost nothing, and she made you feel rich while eating it. That's magic. That's what we lost. So what happened? Where did these breakfasts go? Let me tell you about the Great Migration. Between 1916 and 1970, 6 million black Americans left the South, escaping violence, escaping Jim Crow, seeking better lives in northern cities. They packed memories, they packed recipes in their heads, but they left cast iron stoves behind, left gardens, left the networks that made these breakfasts possible. In Chicago, in Detroit, in New York, you couldn't grow your own vegetables, couldn't keep chickens, couldn't make molasses. You bought everything, and stores, they sold convenience. By the 1960s, boxed cereal was everywhere. Instant grits, pancake mix, a whole culture of food designed to save time and erase tradition. The breakfasts that had fed generations were replaced by convenience. And the dishes that once symbolized strength? Quietly labeled unhealthy or old-fashioned. But let's be clear, this wasn't just natural evolution. This was soul food being called poverty food. This was traditional breakfast being seen as embarrassing. This was black culinary culture being dismissed as backwards, while white chefs copied it and called it innovation. Companies marketed convenience as progress, as modern, as better. They made homemade seem backward, made tradition seem like something to escape. And slowly, mothers who worked factory jobs didn't have time to make biscuits from scratch. Children who grew up in cities never learned to fry mush. Grandmother's techniques died with them because nobody was watching anymore. By the time grandchildren realized what they'd lost, grandparents were gone. If you're liking this content and you want to help us keep uncovering stories like this, please leave a subscribe. It really helps us keep going. These memories deserve to be served hot again. But here's what they couldn't erase completely. Some of these breakfasts survived, hidden in plain sight. Hoe Cakes didn't vanish. They just rebranded as cornmeal pancakes. Sweet rice turned into fancy rice pudding at upscale restaurants charging $20 a bowl. And coffee made from roasted corn or chicory? You've probably had it if you've ever been to New Orleans. The names changed, but the roots, still black, still brilliant. Let me tell you about Hoe Cakes, the real origin story. They were first made by enslaved cooks who mixed cornmeal with water, slapped it on the back of a hoe, the farming tool, and cooked it over open flame. That's right, the pancake's ancestor was cooked on a garden tool by people who had nothing but resourcefulness. That's how real soul food was born, not in fancy kitchens, in fields, by hands that created beauty from brutality. Now we eat fluffy pancakes and never think about hoe cakes, never connect the dots, never acknowledge that breakfast in America was built by enslaved genius, or take chicory coffee. In New Orleans, it's celebrated, it's signature, but nobody mentions that black families invented it out of necessity during the Depression when real coffee was too expensive. They roasted chicory root, ground it, mixed it with coffee grounds to stretch the supply. And what they created? Something darker, richer, more complex than regular coffee. Now you pay $7 for chicory coffee at bougie cafes. They call it artisanal. And nobody mentions the black grandmothers who pioneered it. That's how it works. Black innovation becomes everyone's tradition. Black genius becomes America's heritage. And the originators, forgotten. Every time someone made syrup from scratch or stirred sweet rice before dawn, they were passing down a story. A recipe wasn't just food, it was a piece of memory. So when we forget what breakfast used to taste like, we forget who we are. Think about that. You can trace your entire family history through breakfast. The way your grandmother made grits, that came from her grandmother who learned it from her grandmother, going back generations, going back to Africa. The specific way she seasoned her biscuits, the exact moment she knew to flip a hoe cake, the rhythm she hummed while cooking. That's not random, that's inheritance. But when that knowledge dies, when those recipes disappear, when nobody remembers how to make the breakfasts that built us, we lose more than food. We lose ourselves. The loss of oral history is the loss of self. Food is a living record of black resilience, of adaptation, of genius under impossible circumstances. They tried to take our recipes, just like they tried to take our stories. But here's what they didn't count on. Some of us remember. Some of us are asking questions. Some of us are digging through family memories and recovering what was almost lost. Do you remember any of these breakfasts? Drop it in the comments, because these memories are how we fight forgetting. Here's the good news. These breakfasts are coming back. Modern black chefs are reviving them. Food historians are documenting them. Families are rediscovering recipes they thought were lost. You don't need a time machine, just some cornmeal, molasses, and memory. Start a Sunday breakfast tradition again. Ask your elders what they used to eat before cereal took over. You might find a whole world sitting in your family's kitchen. Make hoe cakes, fry some mush, pour molasses into your coffee and see what your grandmother was talking about. Because when you cook these foods, you're not just eating, you're honoring. You're saying, I see you, ancestors. I remember. I refuse to let this die. And that's powerful. That's how we take back what was stolen. That's how we preserve what almost vanished. One breakfast at a time, one recipe at a time, one story at a time. Modern creators are reviving old recipes. TikTok has people making hoe cakes for the first time and realizing what they've been missing. Instagram is full of people celebrating homemade biscuits. YouTube is teaching the techniques grandmothers used to pass down by watching. The methods are different, but the spirit? The same. We're reclaiming our culinary heritage. We're refusing to let convenience erase culture. And every time someone makes one of these forgotten breakfasts, they're fighting back against the narrative that told us to forget. Let's bring it home. It's 5 a.m. in Mississippi, 1948. Grandma Pearl is making hoe cakes, humming, moving slow but steady. She doesn't know that decades later people will pay $20 for what she's making with pocket change. She doesn't know that her breakfast will almost disappear, that her grandchildren will grow up on cereal boxes instead of cast iron. But she knows this: what she's cooking matters. It's more than food. It's love. It's memory. It's culture on a plate. And now, we know it too. These breakfasts deserve a place at the table again. So next Sunday morning, skip the box. Fry some hoe cakes. Warm up that syrup. Remember the hands that built these recipes, because they built more than food. They built us. If you grew up with any of these, drop your favorite in the comments. Let's make sure these stories and these breakfasts never fade again. And if you want more stories about the traditions they tried to erase, the innovations they tried to steal, the genius they tried to bury, hit that subscribe button, because we're just getting started recovering what was lost. Share this with someone who remembers when breakfast tasted like home. Share it with someone who needs to understand that convenience came with a cost. Next time, we're uncovering the African healing traditions that became modern medicine. The herbalists who became doctors. The knowledge the system tried to destroy. You won't want to miss it. These breakfasts weren't just forgotten, they were erased. Intentionally, systematically. But erasure only works when we stop remembering. So remember, cook, share, honor, because every bite of cornmeal mush, every sip of chicory coffee, every buttery bite of hand-patted biscuit, that's resistance. That's your ancestors saying, we survived. Our culture survived. Our genius survived. And it tastes like freedom.